Welcome to the Out and About Town Show on CHOP FM 102.7 in Newmarket. I'm your host, Brad Joseph. On today's first segment, we feature AKA the History Hound of Newmarket, Mr. Richard McLeod. And we're going to talk to Richard a little bit about the history of Newmarket. And also, there were lots being sold at the time for $50. Can you believe that in this day and age? With lots going over $100,000, $200,000, you could actually buy a lot in Connaught Gardens for $50. I want to get to the bottom of this. I wonder if there's any more in surplus or anything, Richard. I'd like to welcome Richard to the show. Hello, Richard.
How you doing today?
Well, I'm doing pretty good, and I really got a wake-up call when I saw one of your blogs. At the time, you could actually buy a lot in a subdivision right here in Newmarket for $50.
Yes, back in 1912, the town had the idea that it would get into the residential development business. And so they purchased some land just around the area of what is now the fairgrounds. And they had a huge picnic-style sales pitch one day. Brought people out, and to hold your spot, you had to pay them $50.
That's it, just $50.
Just $50, and it sounds like a great deal. The ending, of course, wasn't very ideal because the whole concept went bust, and these people didn't pay their taxes, and so they lost their $50. So, the initial investment of $50 was lost. The town, at the time that we were approaching the war, discovered that what they could do is they could sell that land, or lease that land, I should say, to the federal government for the military camp that they wanted to attract to Newmarket. That's what they did. So the military took over the land. It was perfect for them because it was already serviced. It had, they had streets, they had sidewalks. It was serviced land, and so the military took it over. And so for nearly 5 years, it was a military camp. And then after the camp was shut down, the town was able to sell the land off to developers, and they in turn sold the land again. Big difference in price. When they sold it after the military camp closed, you were looking at $8,000 to $9,000 for the property.
And de Havilland in Toronto had sort of the same thing, where it's sort of abandoned, and all the personnel that lived on the grounds that actually worked at the Army in de Havilland, they abandoned, and they actually got condos and that going in now in Canadian Army land right in de Havilland.
Well, I think, this is something that probably the public should really think about. Do they really want their town to get involved in being landlords and selling off land, or whether they should be bringing in professionals? This was, it should be noted, this was Newmarket's first foray, I guess you'd say, into developing the subdivisions. So, as I say, it was back in 1912, and they were just figuring out how it was all going to work. It actually worked well because they sold the land, but it didn't work well because the people, I guess, decided not to pay their taxes.
And there also was can you tell the listeners out there a little bit about the Canadian Army Training Center? You mentioned it a little earlier, but I see from the notes here that it became redundant on August 3rd, 1946, and a bylaw was passed to council to repossess, as you said, the leased 32 acres and acquire the residual 20 acres and all the buildings from the War Assets Corporation for $34,700. It was a sure steal of $34,700. Just look at the town of Newmarket right now.
Oh, exactly. Well, I think even when they initially got the idea of attracting the camp to Newmarket, I think the plan always was that they would take the land back after the end of the war. Mind you, at that point, I'm sure people told you at that time they thought that the war would probably last 6 months to a year. Mm-hmm. So little did they know it was going to be 5 or 6 years later. The whole attracting of the military camp was a stroke of genius by Mayor Boyd. Newmarket was in deep trouble. We had made it through the recession, but downtown was in deep trouble. A lot of people don't realize that a number of the stores in Newmarket were up for sale. People were going to close down because there just wasn't the population to support it, and people were unemployed. A number of the employers had not made it through the Depression in a good shape. So Mr. Boyd decided that bringing in a military camp was an excellent idea. Keeping in mind, of course, that Newmarket's population was around 3,500 at that time, and they brought in 3,500 people, changing up every 6 weeks. So, there you doubled the population and all the money that they brought with them.
Well, it's very interesting you brought this up because I see from one of your blogs from the brochure in 1858, it was the first municipal election in actually forming a town from a village. And another familiar name, who was the elder, John Bogart.
Yes. Well, they had been working for a long time for Newmarket to become a village. They had actually gone 3 years previously and had petitioned to become a village, but we didn't get the go-ahead until 58 to become a village. Mr. Bogart's idea was that they would also get the okay to make Bogartown into a village as well.
Mm-hmm.
But eventually, Bogartown became part of Newmarket, so it sort of backfired on him.
Well, I see from your other blogs there that a lot of the streets at the time were named after councillors, as well as the Mulock Farm, the property the town just bought. Can you tell the listeners a little bit about why they decided to name all the streets after councillors?
Well, the difficulty of the street naming of streets has been with us for a long time. A lot of people probably don't realize that at one time the Heritage Newmarket was charged with the idea of doing research and coming up with names for our streets. As is usually the case, councillors like to get recognition, to put their place in our history. And one of the loopholes always was that the developer in the town had the ability to put forward names for streets. And one of the ways that they would reward, councillors who were long-serving or that they thought had done a particularly good job was to name a street or a crescent or a park after them. Now, the situation is still pretty tenuous because the developers now can name streets after whoever they want to name streets after, a large percentage of them. So we're sort of trying to catch up and trying to honor people that we should be honoring. One other thing a lot of people don't realize, I've had people say to me, well, why is it that these new subdivisions are going in, you're not seeing any of the old names? Well, one of the things that council decided to do, and I would say to their credit, was they designated 2018 as the year of the veteran. And so all of the new streets that were coming in, you needed to be a veteran and in order to have a street named after you, which I think is an excellent idea. At least that way we had a criteria, and the people who we were naming streets after weren't politicians.
Well, I like to put a proposal forth towards council. All four of us in this room here, we should have streets named after us. Richard, Brad, Stephanie, and Gareth. Sounds like a good idea.
It's a great idea. Well, it's probably just as valid as some of the streets we do have, but
we'll put that proposal to council next time.
I'm sure they'll listen to you, for sure.
Well, there's a lot of speculation going on in the clock tower downtown, a lot of redevelopment on the clock tower, a lot of controversy going on this new clock tower that's happening right on Main Street right here in Newmarket. Do you have any information? What is the background of this clock tower and any new developments coming on with the building of the structure?
Well, it's interesting. Of course, that was the old post office. And a gentleman named Mac Lewis purchased the post office with the idea that he was going to put a seniors home in there. And he did very well, but of course he was limited in the number of units that he could put in there. he decided everything was wonderful while he owned it. It was a wonderful property. And then what happened was that he decided to sell, and he sold it to Mr. Forrest. Now, Mr. Forrest is a developer. Mr. Forrest is not a owner of nursing homes. And I think it's pretty clear that he never had the intention of putting a nursing home in there. So what he wanted to do is he wanted to figure out some way that he could move the people from that location to another location so that he could use the post office for other purposes. One of the difficulties that I think that the town discovered was that his business is essentially to purchase properties to get the I guess you'd say the government clearance to redevelop, and then flip it to somebody else to do the actual redevelopment. So I think therein the problem was he had the thought, and I guess many people could argue that he was right, that he needed to have a much taller building, that he needed to somehow get a better return on his dollar. He invested a large amount of money to buy the property. So I think that probably he was trying to maximize his return. The difficulty, of course, is that it's a designated property. It was really a battle of wills between the people who believe that when you designate a building that it should be protected, and those people who think that we should always be flexible. If it's a good business opportunity, that we should be flexible. So I think therein laid the problem that they had. He got a little frustrated, I guess, with the slow progress of council. Council wasn't sure what they wanted to do, and so he decided that he would sort of urge the process along by not maintaining the properties, hoping that in that way that perhaps council would decide that it was better to redevelop rather than to try and maintain the properties.
Wasn't it designated as a historic site?
Yes. Well, actually, it's designated in two ways. First of all, being a federal building, and because it is a design that was very unique to the post office, it was designated federally, but as well, it fit within the historic district, I guess you'd say, of Newmarket, the historic district of Main Street. So it was really designated, both ways. Now, he came up with a unique idea of building around it. So what he wanted to propose was that he build a huge building and incorporate the post office within the building, much like they did at the Hockey Hall of Fame with the old Bank of Montreal.
Yeah. So as far as you know, they're going ahead with the development, and all systems are go to build a condominium at that.
Well, no. Actually, what's happened is that the council decided that they did not want him to go, the number of stories he wanted. I believe it was 7 that he wanted, and he decided that he wanted 7, and he didn't want to proceed otherwise. They had been talked that he was going to go to the tribunal that the Ontario government has to try and argue his case. That was somehow, I guess you'd say, put aside. The two parties came to some sort of agreement, and it's currently up for sale. But Mr. Forrest has an idea of how much money he would like to get, and I think, as a business person, I think I could honestly say business people don't like uncertainty, so they would like to know what they can do and what they can't do. And so I think that seems to be right now seems to be the problem, as, what will it become? There's been a lot of people who have stepped forward with some unique ideas of how they would use the property, but I haven't seen anybody put their money down, which is, of course, the key thing. And also, too, we have to remember that there's 3 buildings to the south that he also owns, which he has also tried to include in the sale, trying to get people to buy those as well as the post office. And I think therein lies the difficulty, because those buildings, there's a lot of problems with them. They haven't been maintained.
Right.
And so what they're going to do, I'm not really too sure. As you're aware, one of the buildings was demolished, and there's a big
kerfuffle?
I guess that's a nice way of putting it about what they're going to do there. It's clear that it was demolished, against the law, and we're all just sitting patiently waiting for an inquest to take place and something to happen.
You mentioned a little bit earlier on about the economy of Newmarket, how back when Newmarket became a village to a town. Do you find all this congestion downtown, this reconstruction of the clock tower, has affected a lot of businesses downtown? Because they're really unsure what's going in there?
Well, actually, I don't think Main Street has ever been more profitable than it is now. They've gone back. It's interesting how history is circular. They've gone back to a model which was really what Main Street was in the very beginning, which was taverns, hotels, and eateries. We've returned to that. Maybe we don't have the hotels, but we certainly do have the taverns, and we certainly do have the places to go and eat.
And hair salons.
The difficulty, of course, with Main Street, and anybody who has been following the history of Main Street over the many decades, is that they identified, in the late 1800s, that they had a difficulty with the planning of Main Street. It's very narrow. They have some water issues down there. So there's a lot of issues, and they've constantly trying to come up with some new idea. You probably remember they had the idea that they were going to stop traffic from going down Main Street, seal it off. They were going to cover it. Some people said maybe we should cover it with some sort of a roof and enclose it. Some people didn't want to enclose it because they liked the idea that it was open. They've talked about all kinds of things over the years, but nothing has ever happened. So, the joke, I guess, in the history community is every time I hear a new proposal, I always think, it's probably not going to happen because we don't really have a history of change on Main Street.
Well, we're running a bit out of time, Richard, but you brought up the idea of hotels, and recently there's been a new restaurant downtown on Main Street in Newmarket called the George.
Yes.
And it was from the George Hotel, am I correct?
Yes. At one time there was, at the very beginning there was a tavern there, and then after the tavern left, and I think there was a fire there, it became a tea room, and that hotel is actually quite interesting. A distant relative of mine was the first person who ran that hotel, or who owned that hotel. It was originally called the Forsyth House, and the Forsyths were relatives of mine. And but it's the fact that they put fixed that property up, I think is really good because, as I say, both the tea room and the tavern, I think, were real going concerns in the past. So it's nice to see history. He spent a lot of money. One thing you have to give credit to any entrepreneur who spends their own money and fixes it up and incorporates history into sort of a modernization. I think you have to give them full credit for that. Mike's done and his wife have done an excellent job in doing that.
And especially the way the structures are, 1800-year-old structures, 1900-year-old structures. You're going in to recreate a whole new atmosphere as in a bar. There's a lot of building codes that really got to be adhered to before you go ahead with the construction.
Yes, I think he was. Well, actually, this is what he does for a living. A lot of people think that he just simply owns that hotel, but this is his business. So I think he knows the ropes about how to get things done. But I think also what's really amazing, I did a interview with him, a walkthrough, and put the video on my website. But he gutted it downstairs, and he went right back to the original walls, which was absolutely amazing to see. The old wooden frame and it was just amazing. So he put a lot of work into it. I would imagine that probably it'll be a while before he gets his money back on that project because there was a lot of money, I think, put into that project.
We'll have to go in and taste the wares a little bit later on.
Yeah, they say it's pretty good, the people I've talked to.
Well, we're just about out of time in this segment of Out and About Town. Richard, can you tell the people how to get a hold of you or how to check out your blogs and your Facebook page?
Wow, I'm a busy camper these days.
I see that.
Yes. Well, we have if you want to see videos, you can go to our YouTube channel. It's the History Hound. If you're interested in reading my blog, I post several times a day. You can go to the History Hound on Facebook. I'm also on Twitter, also the History Hound. And if you want to see me in person, I do walking tours of Newmarket here, and we also do presentations. The most common, I guess you'd say, schedule is that I appear every month at the Newmarket Library. It's usually the third Wednesday of the month, and we have a variety of topics. So come on out, listen to us.
Thanks a lot, Richard, and we hope to get you on a future edition of Out and About Town. Thanks a lot for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
You're listening to Out and About Town on Chop FM 102.7, and my next guest is entrepreneur Stephanie Woodward. Stay tuned.